The moment my husband walked into my 62nd birthday party, holding another woman's hand, the room went dead silent. More than 100 guests turned to stare. Family, friends, business partners. Everyone watched as Michael Ferguson smiled and introduced a 39-year-old woman named Sabrina as someone very important to his future. He expected tears. He expected humiliation. What he did not expect was for me to calmly walk onto the stage, pull a sealed envelope from my purse, and drop it in his hands. His smile vanished the second he opened it. Inside lay divorce papers, and that was only the beginning of what I had planned. Before we go on, let's look at this together. If you stood in my shoes that night, what would you have done? Would you have walked away in silence or confronted him in front of everyone? Let me know in the comments. If stories about betrayal, strength, and second chances speak to you, please take a second to like and subscribe. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is. I love reading your messages. My name is Kristen Ferguson, and for most of my life, I believed my marriage would last until my very last breath. Looking back now, I realize how incredibly dangerous that belief can be. When you've spent decades loving someone, building a life and sacrificing for them, you stop imagining a future without them. You stop questioning things. You stop protecting yourself, believing the person beside you would never hurt you. For 35 years, that was exactly how I felt about Michael. We met when I was 26 and he was 28. It happened at a small community fundraiser in Charleston, South Carolina. I was working as a junior accountant at a local firm, and Michael was a project manager for construction. He wasn't rich and he wasn't powerful. He wasn't even successful back then, but he was incredibly charming. Michael had a way of making everyone feel important. When he spoke, he looked directly into your eyes, as if nothing else in the world mattered. At least, that's how it felt then. 3 years later, we married. I still remember our wedding day. We couldn't afford anything extravagant. My dress was simple, the reception was in a church hall, and family made most of the food. But I was so happy. I truly believed I'd found my forever person. During our first years together, money was always tight. There were months of worrying about the bills. Months when our refrigerator sat almost empty. Months when I secretly skipped meals so Michael had enough to eat during his long shifts. I never told him. I didn't want him carrying that burden. When Ethan was born, things got even tougher. Then, 3 years later, our daughter Lauren arrived. Suddenly, we had 2 kids, a mortgage, and more responsibility than we ever expected. But somehow, we kept moving forward. What made those hard years bearable was knowing we were a team, or at least I believed we were. One evening, Michael came home with an idea that changed everything. He wanted to start his own construction company. Most people thought he was crazy. We had limited savings, 2 young kids, debt, and absolutely no guarantee of success. Even my parents thought it was too risky. But I believed in him. I always did. I remember sitting at our kitchen table late one night while the kids slept upstairs. Michael spread business plans across the table, his hands shaking with nervous excitement. "What if I fail?" he asked. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then we'll fail together," I said. And I meant every word. What happened next is something most people never knew. To help Michael launch Ferguson Development Group, I put my own career on hold and reduced my hours. Eventually, I left my accounting position entirely to handle all the bookkeeping from home. I tracked expenses, prepared reports, managed payroll, filed taxes, answered client calls. And when we couldn't afford help, I did absolutely everything myself. Some nights, I worked until 2 a.m. after putting the kids to bed, then woke up at 6 to start again. I wasn't just Michael's wife. I was his partner, his support system, his safety net. When the company needed more funding, I agreed to use my late grandmother's inheritance as collateral for a loan. That decision absolutely terrified me. If the business failed, we could lose nearly everything. But Michael promised, "I will never forget what you are doing for me." Those words stayed in my heart for years. I repeated them to myself whenever things got hard. Eventually, the sacrifices paid off. The company grew, and then it exploded. New contracts, more employees, soaring revenue. For the first time in our lives, we actually felt financially secure. We moved into a beautiful home outside Charleston, with a large porch overlooking the water. It was the kind of place we once thought only wealthy people could afford. I remember standing in the backyard one afternoon, just watching Ethan and Lauren play. Michael wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "We made it." At the time, I believed him. Years passed, and the children grew up. Ethan earned a business degree and built a great career in corporate consulting. Lauren became a teacher. I couldn't have been prouder of them. Our family wasn't perfect. No family is. But from the outside, we looked happy, successful, and blessed. The kind of couple younger people pointed to and hoped to be like someday. If anyone had told me back then that my marriage would collapse in front of hundreds of people, I would have laughed. I would have thought they were insane. Even as Michael became incredibly successful, I never doubted his loyalty, not once. I trusted him completely, and maybe that was my fatal mistake. The first changes were subtle, so subtle that I chose to ignore them. Michael started spending more time at the office. At first, it made sense. The company was expanding. More projects meant more responsibility. I understood that. But then came the business trips, and then the late-night meetings. Then came the constant distractions whenever we spent time together. At dinner, his mind was somewhere else. His phone was always nearby. His attention rarely was. But I kept making excuses for him. I told myself he was stressed, exhausted, buried in work. I needed to believe it, because the truth hurt too much. One night, I was talking about our anniversary plans. Michael barely glanced up from his screen. He just muttered, "What?" even though I'd already said it twice. It was only a split second, but something shifted inside me. For the first time in 35 years, I felt completely alone, sitting right next to my husband. I didn't realize it then, but that cold feeling was the beginning of everything. The start of endless questions, hidden secrets, and truths I never wanted to face. Before long, I would learn that the man I had trusted with my entire life was no longer the person I thought I knew. For months, I convinced myself everything was fine. That's what so many women do after decades of marriage, just to survive. We brush off the warning signs because facing the truth feels so much more terrifying than staying blind. At least that's what I did. The changes in Michael didn't happen overnight. They crept in slowly, one tiny piece at a time. First came the late nights, then the sudden business trips, then his constant distraction. Soon, those little details grew impossible to ignore. One morning, I caught him lingering in front of the bathroom mirror. He wasn't just brushing his hair. He was examining it, studying every strand. A week later, I realized he'd started dyeing the gray. The man who once joked about getting old suddenly seemed obsessed with staying young. A month later, high-end clothes started filling our closet. Designer shirts, expensive shoes, and tailored jackets. Michael never used to care about style. For decades, I had to drag him to the store just to replace old jeans. Now, he was spending hundreds of dollars without saying a word. "Is that a new shirt?" I asked one evening. He barely glanced up. "Yeah, needed something for a client meeting." It sounded reasonable until the next week brought another new shirt, then another, and another. Soon, he looked like a guy getting ready for a first date instead of my husband of 35 years. The gym was another mystery. Michael hated exercising. Suddenly, he was working out 5 mornings a week, sometimes even 6. He bought fancy athletic gear, protein powders, even hired a trainer. I tried to laugh it off. "Trying to impress someone?" I teased one morning. For a split second, his face went cold. Just a second, but I caught it. Then he laughed. "Maybe I'm just trying to impress my wife." I smiled back, but his answer felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in his head. The biggest shift was his phone. For decades, neither of us ever cared about passwords. If my phone rang, he grabbed it. If his rang, I answered. We had absolutely no secrets. At least, we didn't used to. Then one afternoon, I picked up his phone from the counter because it wouldn't stop buzzing. I wasn't snooping, just bringing it to him. But when the screen lit up, it asked for a passcode. I froze. Michael had never locked his phone. When he came into the kitchen, I asked him about it. "Oh, company policy," he said, not missing a beat. "Security issues." It sounded logical, but a voice inside told me otherwise. Over the next few months, I began noticing strange new habits. Michael never left his phone behind. If he went to the bathroom, it went with him. If he stepped outside, it was in his pocket. Even if he drifted off on the couch, that phone stayed tucked away. The secrecy felt so unnatural for a husband who'd spent decades with absolutely nothing to hide. One night, we were eating dinner alone. Lauren had moved out years ago, and Ethan was down in Atlanta. Our home felt so much quieter than it used to. I was telling him about a charity event I was planning. Halfway through, I realized Michael wasn't even listening. He was staring down at his phone under the table, smiling. Not a polite grin, but a soft, private smile. The kind you give when a message excites you. My stomach sank. "Michael?" No response. "Michael!" He finally looked up. "What?" I just stared at him. "I've been speaking for 5 minutes." He gave a dramatic sigh. "You don't have to make everything a problem, Kristen." Those words cut deep. Not because he was screaming, but because he was so dismissive. It felt like my feelings were suddenly just an inconvenience to him, like I had become an inconvenience. For the first time, I went to sleep angry, and for the first time, he didn't care. The silence between us kept growing. Every conversation got shorter. Every look felt colder. Then the remarks started. At first, they sounded innocent enough. "You're lucky you don't have to work." Or, "Most women your age would kill for this lifestyle." Or, Just relax and enjoy retirement, Kristen. Those comments cut deep because they ignored the truth. I hadn't spent my life just sitting around relaxing. I helped build everything we had. Every dollar, every victory, every door opened. Yet Michael talked more and more like he did it, all alone. One afternoon I confronted him, not with anger, just honesty. Do you really think I've contributed nothing to this family? His reaction stunned me. Instead of comforting me, he laughed. He actually laughed. Oh, come on, Kristen. It was a brief chuckle, but I'll never forget it. I'll never forget how incredibly small that laugh made me feel. Around that time, Ethan came home for the weekend. We were sitting out on the porch while Michael was away on a business trip. I finally opened up about some of my worries, just to gauge his reaction. To my surprise, Ethan immediately took his side. Dad is under a ton of pressure, Mom. He runs a massive company. I knew that. You're probably just overthinking things. That stung because it sounded exactly like his father. I forced a smile, wanting to believe my son was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I was just paranoid. That's what I kept telling myself. But Lauren's reaction was different. A few weeks later, we met for lunch. The second she saw my face, she knew. What's wrong, Mom? I hesitated, then let it all out. The late nights, the secret phone, the icy distance, his cold remarks. Lauren listened in silence. When I finished, she just stared down at her coffee. Then I saw it. She wasn't surprised at all. My chest tightened, heart hammering. Lauren looked up. Do you know something? Her eyes filled with total uncertainty. I don't know anything for sure. That wasn't a denial. Lauren swallowed hard. I've just noticed he's acting different too. A cold chill ran through me. For weeks, those words haunted my mind. If Lauren saw it too, I wasn't just losing my mind. Something was seriously wrong. The proof arrived on a dreary Tuesday. Michael had left for what he called a 3-day business trip to Charlotte. I was sorting files in our home office when I spotted a strange envelope hidden between folders. Usually I would have ignored it, but some gut instinct made me grab it. Inside lay a printed receipt. Seemed normal at first, until I saw the location. A high-end resort in Savannah, Georgia. Not Charlotte, Savannah. My hands started shaking as I checked the dates. It perfectly matched his last trip. 2 guests, a luxury suite, 3 nights. I just stared at the slip of paper for an eternity. Part of me desperately wanted an innocent explanation. Some simple mistake, some mix-up. But deep down, I already knew. For months, my gut had been screaming at me. Now, I finally had cold, hard proof. Not of everything, but proof that my husband lied. Once your husband starts lying about where he is, the questions get terrifying. Who was he with? How long had this been going on? And worst of all, who was worth throwing away 35 years of marriage for? I didn't confront Michael after finding that receipt. That might surprise some people. If I were younger, I would have demanded answers right then. I would have slammed that receipt on the counter and made him explain every single lie. But after 35 years together, something changes. You actually become terrified of hearing the truth. As long as I stayed quiet, there was still a sliver of hope I was wrong. A tiny chance that there was some explanation I had missed. The second I confronted him, that hope would vanish forever. So instead, I played it cool. I waited and I watched. For the very first time, I started watching my own husband the way a detective studies a suspect. It was agonizing. Once I actually paid attention, I saw clues I'd ignored for months, maybe years. Michael became insanely protective of his calendar. Whenever I casually brought up his projects, his answers were vague. Just business, nothing exciting, the usual. But he was gone more than ever. One night, he claimed he had a dinner with investors. 3 hours later, I checked the company's Instagram. The event photos were already online. Michael wasn't in a single shot. That was the very first lie I could actually prove. That realization left me sitting alone in the dark kitchen past midnight, staring at the window over the sink. My reflection looked so much older, exhausted, terrified, heartbroken. I asked myself the one question I had been avoiding. What if Michael is having an affair? The words felt like poison. Just thinking them made me sick to my stomach, because if he was, everything I believed about my marriage was built on a lie. A few days later, I decided I needed facts, not wild assumptions. Solid facts. I didn't want a dramatic scene. I just wanted the raw truth. And my chance came out of nowhere, when Michael left his laptop open in the office. Normally, I'd never snoop through his work things, but that day I made an exception. I told myself I just needed answers, nothing more. He hadn't even locked it. Within minutes, I was scrolling through dozens of company emails. Most were boring contracts, invoices, and schedules. But then, one name kept popping up. Sabrina Hayes. I'd never heard of her. At first glance, it seemed harmless. She was the director of business development, hired by Michael about a year ago. But as I kept reading, things got weird. Her role seemed way too critical for someone who had just joined the firm. She was looped in on confidential files, involved in executive decisions, and invited to private leadership meetings. Even worse, long-term managers seemed incredibly frustrated by her sudden influence. One email stopped me cold. A department head had literally written, "Why is Sabrina in financial strategy meetings when she has no background in accounting?" Michael's response was incredibly brief. "Because I trust her judgment." I read that sentence 3 times. It felt so personal, not professional. My stomach knotted. Over the next week, I quietly kept digging. I never, ever imagined myself acting like this. But each new clue pushed me further. One afternoon, I dropped by company headquarters under the excuse of delivering some papers. The receptionist gave me a warm welcome. Most staff still remembered my years working there. Walking through the building, I noticed a framed photo from a recent company retreat. Dozens of staff stood by a lake. My eyes locked onto Michael. Then I saw her. Sabrina was right next to him, way closer than any employee should be to a married boss. Her hand rested on his arm. Most people wouldn't have thought twice, but I noticed, because wives always notice. She was beautiful, painfully beautiful, tall, blonde, and incredibly elegant. The kind of woman who commands any room she enters. The kind who makes an aging man feel young again. For a long time, I just stared at that photo. Not because I hated her, not yet, but because I finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't just some one-night slip-up. Something far deeper was going on. A few days later, Fate handed me another piece of the puzzle. My friend Diane went to a charity luncheon downtown. When she called me that night, her voice sounded so hesitant. "Kristen, can I ask you something?" "Of course." A long pause. Then she said it. "Was Michael supposed to be in Savannah last month?" My pulse instantly jumped. "Why?" Another pause. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. My heart sank. "Diane, I saw him." The room began to spin. "Where?" "At a resort outside Savannah." I closed my eyes. The receipt, the lie, the missing trip, everything suddenly clicked together. "Was he alone?" I asked quietly. Diane hesitated, and that silence told me everything. "No." My chest tightened. "Who was with him?" "I don't know her name." But I already knew. Young, blonde, stylish, confident, beautiful, Sabrina Hayes. After the call ended, I sat there in complete silence. I should have cried. I should have screamed. Instead, I felt strangely calm. For once, I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was facing reality. And reality hurt. But uncertainty hurt so much more. Over the following weeks, I discovered even more. Company events, social media, industry pages. Sabrina was everywhere. And Michael was right there with her. Golf outings, fundraisers, business conferences. Always nearby, smiling, looking way too comfortable around a married man. The final confirmation came from my daughter, Lauren. She had no idea she was confirming anything. One evening, she stopped by. We were drinking tea when she casually mentioned seeing her father at a restaurant a few weeks back. "Who was he with?" I asked. Lauren instantly looked uncomfortable. That was answer enough. My heart dropped. "You saw her, didn't you?" Lauren stared at the table, then nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know what to do, Mom." Her voice broke my heart. She had been carrying this heavy burden all alone. "I didn't want to hurt you." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Neither of us spoke for a long time. When she finally left, I sat alone in the dark. The truth was no longer just a suspicion. It was a hard fact. Michael Ferguson was having an affair. The man I had loved for 35 years. The man whose dreams I had sacrificed for. The man I trusted with my entire life had chosen someone else. But as devastating as that was, a more troubling question started keeping me awake. Because the more I learned about Sabrina Hayes, the more something felt off. This did not look like love. It looked like pure ambition. She wasn't just getting close to Michael. She was invading the company, the finances, the big decisions, and our future. Deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling she wanted something much bigger than my husband. Finding out about his affair shattered my heart. But realizing my own family might not stand by me nearly shattered my spirit. Looking back, that was the moment I saw how truly alone I was. Not because I had no one, but because the people closest to me were absolutely terrified of facing the truth. And fear makes good people do deeply disappointing things. For nearly 2 weeks after confirming the affair, I told absolutely no one except Lauren. I carried this heavy burden alone. Every morning, I woke up beside the man betraying me. Every evening, I sat across from him at dinner. Every talk was a performance. Every smile was a lie. Yet Michael seemed completely comfortable, and that hurt more than anything. He did not act like a guilty man or someone worried about losing his marriage. If anything, he seemed more confident than ever, like he believed he had already won. One evening, he announced another out-of-town conference. I simply nodded. The old me would have asked questions. The new me stayed silent. Michael studied my face. "You okay?" That question almost made me laugh after his months of lies. Now he suddenly cared if I was okay. "I'm fine." He looked relieved, then immediately went back to checking his phone. I watched him for a few seconds. For the first time in 35 years, I did not recognize the man sitting across from me. It was devastating. A few days later, I called my son, Ethan. I knew it would be hard, but I needed to know where he stood. He arrived that Saturday afternoon. The weather was beautiful, with sunlight dancing off the water behind our house. Under any other circumstances, it would have been peaceful. Instead, my stomach churned with anxiety. We sat on the back porch, and for a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work, traffic, sports. Neither of us wanted to start the real conversation. Finally, I forced myself to say it. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He looked concerned. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "I think your father is having an affair." The words hung heavily between us. His reaction was instant and completely unexpected. He frowned, shaking his head. "No." His absolute certainty startled me. "I have reasons to believe it." "Dad wouldn't do that." I almost laughed at the irony because I used to say those exact words. "I have evidence." Ethan crossed his arms. "What kind of evidence?" I told him everything. The resort receipt, the lies, Sabrina, the photos, the restaurant sightings, everything. When I finished, he stared out at the water. For a brief second, I thought he might finally understand. Instead, he sighed. "Mom, even if all that is true," those words felt like a knife to the chest. He rubbed his forehead. "You don't know the full story." "What story would justify this?" "I'm not saying it does." "Then what are you saying?" Ethan hesitated. Then he said something I will never forget. "Maybe you should think twice before blowing up the entire family." I just stared. For several seconds, I couldn't even speak. Not out of anger, but from deep, crushing hurt. The message was clear. Protect the family. Protect the reputation. Protect the business. But protecting me? Not a priority. "I spent my life protecting this family," I said quietly. "I know. But did you hear a word I just said?" His eyes softened. "Of course I did." "Then why are you defending him?" Ethan shifted, clearly uncomfortable because he knew I was right. Still, he couldn't bring himself to condemn his father. Finally, he stood up. "Just promise me you'll think before making any major decisions." After he left, I sat on the porch alone for nearly an hour. I wasn't angry with Ethan, not entirely. I understood where he was coming from. Michael wasn't just my husband. He was Ethan's dad, the man he looked up to and admired. Accepting the truth meant Ethan would have to reevaluate everything about his father. A realization like that doesn't happen overnight. Still, that talk left me feeling completely isolated. Lauren's response, though, was different. A few days later, she came over for dinner. The second she walked into the kitchen, she saw it on my face. You talked to Ethan, didn't you? I nodded, and her expression instantly darkened. He defended Dad. I nodded again. Lauren shook her head, her voice thick with obvious sadness. I knew he would. Unlike her brother, Lauren never saw the world in simple black and white. She knew how complicated people were, and she had seen enough to know something was terribly wrong. I don't know what to do anymore, I admitted. The confession surprised me. For most of my life, I'd been the strong one, the anchor, the problem solver. Now I felt completely lost. Lauren reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Mom, she said. I looked up. You don't deserve this. Those words nearly broke me. It was the first time anyone had actually said them. Tears filled my eyes. Not because she had the answers, but because she simply acknowledged my pain. Sometimes that is enough. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she asked, What do you want? I opened my mouth, but stopped because I honestly had no idea. Did I want Michael to come home and confess? Did I want him begging for forgiveness? Did I want the affair to end, or did I just want my old life back? The truth was much harder. What I wanted most was impossible. I wanted 35 years of trust back. I wanted my certainty restored. I wanted my innocence restored. But none of that could happen. Once trust breaks, something fundamental shifts forever, even if the marriage survives. The next week, another moment forced me to face a painful reality. Michael and I attended a charity fundraiser together. He barely acknowledged me all night, spending his time talking to business associates instead. At one point, I walked up to a small group conversation. The second I joined them, Michael cut in. We were discussing company strategy. The message was clear. I didn't belong in this conversation. The humiliation stung, subtle but undeniable. Years ago, I had helped build that company. Now Michael treated me like an outsider who couldn't possibly understand. Driving home later that night, I just stared out the passenger window. Michael chatted casually about new business opportunities as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't spent months lying to my face, as if our marriage wasn't collapsing right beneath us. That was when the truth finally hit me. Michael wasn't afraid of losing me at all. He truly believed I would stay. After 35 years of devotion, sacrifice, and forgiveness, he assumed I would just put up with anything. The cheating, the lies, the total disrespect. For the first time, I started wondering if leaving was the only language he would actually understand. But before making any moves, I needed answers. Real answers. No more assumptions, no more suspicions. I had to uncover exactly what Michael had been doing and what he was hiding. Deep down, I had this sinking feeling that the affair was only the beginning. The second I stopped thinking like a hurting wife and started thinking like an accountant, everything shifted. For months, I'd focused on the affair, the lies, and the emotional wreckage. But after talking with my kids, I started looking at the situation through a different lens. Michael wasn't just my husband. He was the CEO of a business I had helped build from the ground up. And if there was one thing I understood better than anyone, it was paperwork. Numbers rarely lie, but people do. That next Monday morning, I called a lawyer named Rebecca Lawson. She came highly recommended by a close friend who had gone through a messy divorce a few years back. Walking into her office, my chest was tight, not because I doubted my choice, but because being there meant admitting my marriage was truly over. Rebecca greeted me warmly. In her late 50s, she was confident and incredibly composed, the kind of person who instantly made me feel safe. After listening to my story for almost an hour, she leaned back. "Kristen, I need to ask you something." "Of course." "How involved were you in the early years of the business?" I nearly laughed. "Very involved." "Can you be specific?" So I laid it out. Bookkeeping, payroll, tax records, loans, financial planning, vendor accounts. I handled literally everything. I described using my inherited assets as collateral when the company struggled. I explained how I signed financial documents most spouses never even see. Rebecca listened intently before asking her next question. "Do you still have copies of those records?" I blinked. "Some of them." "Find them." The sudden seriousness in her voice caught me off guard. "Why?" She folded her hands. "Because I think there might be some things your husband forgot." For the first time all day, I felt something other than heavy sadness. Curiosity. That very evening, I started digging through old storage boxes in our home office. Decades of records packed the filing cabinets and closets. Most people would have thrown those old papers out, but not me. The accountant in me saved everything. By midnight, my dining room table was buried under folders. Loan agreements, corporate filings, property deeds, tax returns, and ownership documents. Some were over 20 years old, dating back to the very beginning of Ferguson Development Group. As I flipped through them, memories came flooding back. Every risk, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every decision Michael and I had made together. The deeper I looked, the more I realized something vital. So many assets were tied to me, not just through marriage, but legally and directly. Properties we bought during the company's early expansion still carried my personal guarantees. In some cases, my signature sat right next to Michael's. In others, my own financial history was essential to secure the loans. I wasn't just a wife. I was a cornerstone of this empire. That realization gave me a strange wave of strength. For months, Michael had made me feel worthless. The paperwork proved otherwise. 2 days later, I walked back into Rebecca's office with boxes of files. She spent hours reading. The more she saw, the more intrigued she became. Finally, she looked up. "This is massive," she said. "Your role was far greater than a typical spouse's." I just nodded. "I know." "Does Michael know all this paperwork still exists?" she asked. I thought about it, then shook my head. Probably not. He never cared about the past. He only cared about the future, the next deal, the next contract. Meanwhile, I had quietly preserved decades of our history. Rebecca suggested hiring an independent forensic accountant, someone who could dissect the company's financial records in detail. A week later, I met Nathan Cole, a seasoned financial investigator in his mid-40s. After looking over the files, he agreed to help me. We started slowly. At first, Nathan only requested public records like corporate filings, property deeds, and business registrations. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then he started digging deeper, asking questions I couldn't answer. Questions only Michael could. Even so, one detail jumped out immediately. Some recent transactions seemed highly unusual. Not illegal necessarily, just very strange. Cash was moving differently than in the past, shifting between accounts far too often. Even the consulting payments seemed way too large. Certain vendor contracts looked oddly structured. Nathan didn't jump to conclusions, and neither did Rebecca, but they both urged me to keep digging. Over the next few weeks, I watched him closely. For the first time, Michael was bringing home financial sheets, poring over them for hours. He never used to do that. He would lock himself in his study for hours. Whenever I walked in unexpectedly, he'd quickly shut his laptop, close folders, and change the subject. It felt incredibly suspicious. One night, I casually asked how work was going. "Great," he replied instantly. "Any trouble?" "No." His answers were too fast, almost rehearsed. I studied his face. The man sitting across from me looked confident, but he wasn't relaxed. There was a hard tension beneath his eyes. Something was eating at him. I could see it. Then, the next month brought another twist. While sorting through old folders, I found original loan agreements dating back nearly 30 years. One specific clause instantly caught my eye. Properties we used as collateral in our early days were still tied to debts that had never been formally restructured. I didn't fully understand the legal weight of it, but Rebecca did. The moment I showed her, her eyes lit up. "This is huge," she said. My pulse raced. For the first time since discovering his affair, I felt a spark of hope. Not because I was seeking revenge, but because I was finally starting to piece together the truth. Michael spent months treating me like I was completely helpless, like I was just some clueless, aging wife who would quietly sign whatever he put in front of me. But he forgot one crucial detail. Before I was his wife, I was an accountant. I helped build the foundation of his empire, and I never forget details. One afternoon, Nathan called. His voice was unsettlingly grim. "Kristen, I found something." My stomach tied itself in knots. "What is it?" "I need to verify more files before I draw conclusions," he said. It wasn't reassuring. "Just tell me what you found." A heavy silence stretched between us. Then he spoke. "There are suspicious transfers tied to accounts involved in recent projects." I waited, holding my breath. "And I think your husband is preparing for something." A cold chill gripped me. "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet." But deep down, I already knew. Michael wasn't just cheating on me. He wasn't just lying. He was plotting, moving chess pieces on a board I hadn't even realized we were playing on. If my gut was right, his affair was only the tip of the iceberg. A scheme that could destroy our assets, our lives, and everything we built over 35 years. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just uncovering an affair. I was exposing a trap. And whatever Michael was planning, I was going to stop him before he could make his final move. The funny thing about betrayal is that once the fog clears, the fear starts to fade. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece. The broken woman who cried herself to sleep every night was finally fading away. The wife who desperately wanted to protect her marriage at any cost was finally asking a different question. What exactly was I saving? Because the union I cherished no longer existed. The trust was gone. The honesty, the partnership, all dead. All we had left was a beautiful illusion. And Michael seemed desperate to keep that illusion alive. Then, 3 weeks after Nathan's warning, my husband caught me completely off guard with an announcement. We were eating breakfast when he casually set down his mug. I booked the Grand Harbor Ballroom. I stared at him. The what? The Grand Harbor. Everyone in Charleston knew it. It was the most prestigious, exclusive venue in the entire city. It was expensive, elite, and packed with politicians. What for? I asked. Michael smiled warmly. Your birthday. I just stared at him. My birthday. You're turning 62, he said. I know, I replied. I thought we should celebrate properly. I was completely baffled. He barely even acknowledged our anniversary. He spent months emotionally abandoning me, drifting away completely. And now, he wanted to throw me a lavish birthday party? It didn't make sense. And when things don't add up, there's always a reason. That seems unnecessary, I said. Nonsense, he replied, his fake smile never wavering. We will invite family, friends, clients, and business associates. There was my first real clue. This party wasn't for me at all. He just wanted an audience. Back then, I didn't know his exact plans, but I was deeply suspicious. Then, a week later, I got an unexpected phone call from George Whitman. George had known my husband and me for more than 25 years. He was our company's first major investor. He was one of the few partners still around from the start. Unlike the other associates, George always treated me as an equal. He remembered when I built this business alongside Michael, long before success ruined him. Kristen, he said quietly, can we meet? His tense tone immediately set off alarm bells. 2 days later, we met at a small seafood spot overlooking the harbor. George looked incredibly tense, which warned me this wouldn't be easy. After some forced small talk, he finally got to the point. I don't like what is happening. My stomach sank. What do you mean? He sighed. I mean, Michael. I kept quiet. He is making decisions that worry me. What kind of decisions? George hesitated, then leaned in close. How much do you know about Sabrina Hayes? There was that name again, the one popping up everywhere lately. Enough, George nodded. Then you know she is in board meetings now. I hear she's attending far more than just meetings. My heart raced. What do you mean? George scanned the room before whispering, Michael is setting her up to take over a leadership role. For a moment, I was speechless. Leadership? Sabrina? The girl had barely been with the company for a year. The senior executives are furious, George said. She has zero experience. I already knew that. So why is Michael doing this? George looked at me sadly. The answer was agonizingly obvious. We didn't have to say it. Michael was no longer running a business. He was letting his emotions run it. And personal choices can cost everything. George reached into his bag, pulled out a stack of papers, and slid them my way. I stared at it. Calendars, planning files, and corporate retreats. Sabrina was listed everywhere, far too frequently for a new hire. It was impossible to ignore. George, I whispered, but he cut me off. I am telling you because I think he is pushing you out. His words felt like a physical blow. I had suspected it, of course, but hearing it out loud made the nightmare real. For months, I only focused on his cheating, but a much darker truth was surfacing. What if he wasn't just replacing me in his bed? What if he was erasing me completely, as his wife, his business partner, and from the very history we built together. The thought made me physically sick. That night, I met my legal and financial team. We laid out everything: the cheating, the weird bank transfers, George's warning, and Sabrina's rising power. Rebecca listened in silence. When we finished, she folded her hands on her desk. "Kristen, you need to prepare." "For what?" "A massive legal battle." Silence filled the room. Nathan nodded grimly. "I agree." Weeks ago, those words would have broken me. Now, they just confirmed what I knew. Michael was making his move, and I had to be ready for war. The next few days became a whirlwind as Rebecca began organizing our legal files. Nathan combed through the financial records while I hunted down every shred of proof. It was draining, but incredibly empowering. For the first time, I was actively shaping my destiny instead of just taking the hits. Then, Rebecca called me one afternoon. "I have the paperwork," she said. I knew instantly. The divorce papers that would dismantle 35 years of my life. Silence stretched between us. Finally, I whispered, "Okay." The very next morning, I walked into her office. She handed me a plain, sealed envelope. It looked ordinary, but felt heavier than anything I had ever held. I just stared at it. Inside was the death of my past and the birth of my future. "Do you want to file today?" Rebecca asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." She looked stunned. "Why?" I pictured my husband, his mistress, all the lies and the humiliation. Then my mind drifted to this upcoming birthday party. A dark plan had been taking shape for weeks, and now it was crystal clear. Michael wasn't throwing this gala for me. It was for his ego, his reputation, and whatever grand announcement he planned to drop on everyone. Suddenly, I knew exactly how to play this. I slid the sealed envelope right into my purse. Rebecca watched me closely. "What are you planning?" I looked her in the eyes. "I think Michael wants an audience." A slow smile spread across her face, and I grinned back. "I think I will give him one." For the first time since uncovering his cheating, I felt truly at peace. Not because my issues were resolved, or the hurt had vanished, but because I finally had a plan of my own. Michael thought he controlled the entire narrative and owned our future. He expected me to stay quiet, broken, and completely predictable. What he didn't realize was that I had already decided exactly when our marriage would end. And if my gut was right, the Grand Harbor Ballroom was about to host a birthday celebration that Charleston would never forget. My party arrived with absolutely perfect weather. The sky over Charleston was a brilliant blue, and the harbor shimmered under the afternoon sun. People always talk about that strange feeling right before your life changes forever. They are right. The moment I woke up that morning, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. By the time this night ended, my marriage would be over. And only one person in this city knew it. Me. Michael had no clue, spending the whole morning playing the devoted husband. Flowers even arrived right after breakfast. A massive bouquet of white roses and lilies, my absolute favorites. Years ago, it would have touched my heart. Now, it just felt like a performance, a show staged for an audience, not for me. "Happy birthday," Michael said, kissing my cheek. I forced a smile and whispered a thank you. He looked so pleased, like he had successfully nailed his role. The irony almost made me laugh. He thought he was running the show tonight, but he had no idea what was waiting inside my purse. That sealed envelope sat hidden exactly where I wanted it. Patient, quiet, ready. Around 4 o'clock, I started getting ready. I stared into my bedroom mirror longer than usual. Not to impress anyone, but because I needed to remember this version of myself, the one who still belonged to my old life, the woman standing on the edge of a terrifying, unknown future. I chose a navy blue evening gown, elegant, simple, classic, the kind of dress that speaks volumes without demanding attention. Once I finished, I quietly studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed different than 6 months ago. Stronger, yes, but sadder and wiser. New lines had formed around my eyes, but I saw something else, too. Resolve. The terrified wife was fading. The woman left standing had finally stopped apologizing for merely existing. By 6 o'clock, we reached the Grand Harbor Hotel. The ballroom was breathtaking, with crystal chandeliers hanging high above. Crisp white linens draped dozens of tables, and floor-to-ceiling windows framed the dark harbor water. Fresh flowers bloomed in every single corner. Hundreds of candles cast a soft, warm glow across the room. It was beautiful, almost painfully so, because beneath the elegance lay a massive lie. Soon the guests started flowing in. Old friends, family, business partners, and colleagues I had known for decades. All of them believed they were just celebrating my birthday. I welcomed everyone, one by one, smiling through the pain, offering thanks and accepting warm hugs and wishes. Yet my mind kept circling back to one terrifying question. When would Michael make his move? I knew he had not thrown this expensive party just for my birthday. Not after months of cold silence. Not after the affair. Not after everything. He had an agenda. I could feel it in my bones. By 7 o'clock, well over 100 guests packed the space. Laughter rippled through the crowd as waiters passed around champagne. On the stage, a live jazz band played soft, melancholy tunes. On the surface, it all looked absolutely perfect. Then my son Ethan walked in, looking sharp as ever. But I sensed something wrong immediately. He looked tense, distracted, and deeply uncomfortable. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, holding me tighter and longer than usual. I pulled back, searching his eyes. "Everything okay?" "Of course." His reply came too fast, echoing the defensive way his father always spoke. A heavy knot tightened in my gut. Before I could press him, Lauren arrived, instantly walking over to wrap her arms around me. A genuine hug, full of silent love. "You look beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you," I replied, as her eyes searched mine. For a second, I wondered if she somehow knew what was coming. If she did, she kept quiet. But as the night wore on, I noticed a shift. Guests kept darting their eyes toward the entrance. My husband's business partners and top executives, as if expecting a VIP arrival. It put me on high alert because the guest of honor was already in the room. Me. So who on earth were they waiting for? The answer walked in 20 minutes later. The doors opened, chatter died down, and there she stood, Sabrina Hayes. Photos of her were one thing, but facing her in the flesh felt entirely different. Real, unsettling. She wore a bold red gown that practically demanded every eye in the room. Her blonde hair fell down her shoulders. She moved with effortless, quiet confidence. Not the polite confidence of an employee or even a guest. No, this was the poise of someone who thought she owned the place. My chest tightened, yet a strange calm washed over me. In that single moment, all my doubts evaporated. This was no innocent friendship. It was exactly what I feared. No professional employee shows up to her married boss's wife's birthday party dressed like that. Whispers immediately rippled through the ballroom. Of course they noticed. How could they not? Guests exchanged confused glances, quietly murmuring to one another. The entire atmosphere shifted subtly, but undeniably. Then I saw something that removed any final trace of doubt. Michael spotted Sabrina, and his face transformed. It wasn't dramatic. Most people missed it, but I didn't. His eyes lit up, his posture shifted, and his smile became real. The kind of look he hadn't given me in years. That hurt far deeper than I expected. 35 years together, and somehow I had become completely invisible. Michael crossed the floor, not to me, but straight to her. I watched them greet each other, far too warmly, far too comfortably. Nearby executives traded awkward glances. George Whitman, who was standing right beside me, quietly leaned in close. You see it now, don't you? I kept quiet. I didn't need to say anything because we both knew it. Actually, the whole room did. The only one clueless about how obvious it looked was Michael, or maybe he just didn't care anymore. As the night went on, Sabrina kept working the room, introducing herself to investors, chatting with clients, and laughing with the executives. At one point, I caught a woman whispering, asking who she was. The response chilled my blood. Someone very important to Michael. Not a staff member, not a coworker, not a manager, just someone very important to him. Those words felt deliberate, calculated, strategic. Just the kind of phrase you use to prep people for an announcement. Suddenly, it clicked. Michael wasn't just bringing Sabrina to this gala. He was unveiling her, introducing her into the very world where I had spent decades building my life and relationships. And he wanted to do it publicly. That realization should have broken me. Instead, it only hardened my resolve. Michael had just made a critical mistake. He honestly believed tonight belonged to him, that he was the one controlling the narrative. He thought I would just stand by quietly while he replaced me in front of everyone who mattered. What he didn't know was that the envelope in my clutch had already changed tonight into something else. I lightly brushed against the bag on my shoulder. Still there, still waiting. Across the ballroom, Michael laughed with Sabrina, relaxed and confident. He had absolutely no idea that in less than an hour, the most humiliating moment of his life would begin. There are moments when time seems to freeze, when every single detail gets permanently burned into your mind. The next 40 minutes would be exactly like that. Even now, I can still feel every heartbeat and remember every whisper, look, and face. The room buzzed with chatter as dinner was served. Crystal glasses flickered under the candlelight. The jazz band kept playing softly in the background. From afar, everything looked perfectly elegant and civil, but under the surface, tension was thick. I could feel it. A few guests had already picked up on the strange vibe between Michael and Sabrina. They weren't whispering out loud yet, but people notice far more than we realize, especially in a room full of old friends and business partners. By 8:30, dessert was cleared and Michael stood up. Right away, a staff member stepped forward to hand him a microphone. My heart started racing. Here we go. The moment he'd been planning, and the one I had been waiting for. Conversations died down. The entire room went quiet as over 100 faces turned toward the stage. Michael flashed a confident grin, the exact same charming smile that had once made me fall deeply in love with him. The same smile that landed huge corporate contracts and hid months of betrayal. "Good evening, everyone," he said. Mild applause followed. Michael scanned the crowd. "I want to thank every one of you for coming tonight." There was more applause. Then he turned to face me. "Most importantly, I want to thank my wife, Kristen." I nearly laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was absolutely absurd. Months of deceit, months of betrayal, and here he was, publicly thanking me. The performance kept going. He went on about our marriage, our family, the business, and all our years together. Some guests smiled warmly, and a few even looked teary-eyed. If they only knew. Then his tone shifted. It was subtle, but I caught it instantly. "Life is made of different chapters," he said. My stomach twisted. Sometimes we have to embrace change. A few guests exchanged confused looks as Michael declared, "The future belongs to those willing to grow." And there it was, the build-up, the setup, the start of whatever big announcement he was about to drop. I glanced across the room. Sabrina hung on his every word. She looked completely calm, confident, and expectant, as if she knew exactly what was next. Michael smiled and reached his hand out to her. "Sabrina, would you mind coming up here for a second?" The energy in the room shifted instantly. A wave of discomfort washed over everyone. You could practically feel the collective confusion, curiosity, and growing concern. Sabrina stood up gracefully from her chair, her red dress looking incredibly striking under the ballroom lights. She glided toward the stage, toward my husband, and toward the future she clearly thought was hers. The whispering started instantly, buzzing all around me. What is going on? Why is she going up? Isn't that the woman from his firm? Oh my God. Michael either missed the tension or just didn't care. Sabrina joined him on stage, and standing side by side, they created a picture that was impossible to ignore. A wealthy, older businessman and his young, blonde executive, together, while his wife sat in the crowd. The symbolism practically shouted at everyone. Michael smiled again. "I would love for everyone to meet someone who has become very special to me." Dead silence. Even the waiters froze. No one wanted to miss a single second of this. Michael looked right at Sabrina, then turned back to us. Over the past year, Sabrina has brought massive value to Ferguson Development Group. Several executives shifted uneasily. George Whitman looked furious. Michael kept talking. "She has helped shape our company's future." Company. Future. Important. Every single word sounded heavily calculated, polished. And then he dropped the line that pushed everything past the point of no return. "I believe she will play a vital role in the next chapter of my life." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Not everyone gasped, but plenty did. Enough to make the room's reaction totally unmistakable. Michael had crossed a line, and did it in front of everyone. I looked over at Ethan. His face had gone totally pale. For once, my son seemed to grasp just how serious things were. Lauren looked absolutely horrified. Guests stared right at me, waiting, wondering, expecting. What would the humiliated wife do now? What would I do? Would I break down and cry? Would I run away? Or make a scene? Michael clearly expected me to crack, because when he finally looked my way, he was so relaxed, so smug and victorious, like he had already won. But he never expected what came next. I was smiling. Not a huge, dramatic grin, just enough to show him. The second he saw it, pure confusion washed over his face. He didn't understand. How could he? He genuinely believed I was the only person standing here without a plan of my own. Slowly, I stood up. Every single eye in the room followed me. The silence was so heavy, I could hear my own soft footsteps, step after step. I walked toward the stage, toward Michael, toward Sabrina, toward the absolute end of my marriage. Neither of them moved. They just stared, frozen. For months, they had controlled the narrative. Now, suddenly, they had no idea what was next. I climbed the steps, and Michael slowly lowered the microphone. Kristen. His voice carried the very first hint of panic I'd heard all night. I reached deep into my purse. Everyone leaned forward, watching, waiting. The entire ballroom felt completely frozen. Then I pulled out the envelope. The one Rebecca had given me weeks ago. The one waiting for this exact moment. Michael frowned, whispering, "What is that?" I looked directly into his eyes. The eyes I had trusted for 35 years. The eyes that lied to me. The eyes that now showed nothing but fear. I handed him the envelope. No speech, no screaming, no tears, just the envelope. Every guest watched in silence. Michael stared at it, confused, then slowly opened it. I will never forget his expression. It was pure, unadulterated shock. All of his confidence vanished in an instant. The color drained completely from his face as his hands began to shake. For several seconds, he just stared, frozen, speechless, unable to process what he was holding. Finally, he looked up at me. "Kristen," he choked out, his voice cracking. For the first time tonight, he looked terrified. I calmly reached out and took the microphone from his hand. The room stayed completely silent, everyone watching, listening, witnessing the moment Michael Ferguson lost absolute control. I looked over the crowd, then at my husband, then at Sabrina, and then I spoke. Since Michael chose tonight to introduce an important new chapter in his life, I said, as the silence grew deeper, I thought it was the perfect time to introduce mine. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I continued, "Those papers are divorce papers." A massive wave of shock swept through the ballroom. Loud gasps and whispers filled the room. Michael was completely blindsided, because for months he'd looked down on me as weak, predictable, and passive. He never once imagined I was secretly preparing for my own future. But my biggest move wasn't what I had already done. The real shock was what I had planned next. The divorce papers were just the beginning. Before this night was over, everyone here would learn who Michael Ferguson truly was. The silence inside the Grand Harbor Ballroom was deafening. Over 100 people stood absolutely frozen in place. No music, no talking, no movement. Just pure shock. Michael stared down at those divorce documents like they had appeared from thin air. His face was completely bloodless. For months, maybe even years, he had imagined himself in absolute control of everything. "Kristen," he whispered. I didn't answer him. Not yet. Because tonight was not about making him feel better. It wasn't about protecting him. I had spent 35 years doing that. Tonight was different. Tonight was about the truth. And I kept holding that microphone. Every eye remained locked on me, waiting, listening, trying to comprehend how a simple birthday party had turned into a night they would never forget. Michael stepped closer, whispering, "We can discuss this privately." There it was, the first reaction of a man who got caught. "Privately?" My voice echoed loudly through the speakers. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. "Did you introduce Sabrina privately?" Whispers rippled through the audience. Michael's jaw clenched. "Kristen, please. Did you humiliate me privately?" The silence grew suffocating. Michael couldn't answer me. On the other side of the stage, Sabrina was squirming. All the smug confidence she had shown earlier had vanished. Her smile was gone. For the first time tonight, she looked completely lost. I faced the crowd. So many of these people had known us for decades. They attended our wedding, watched our kids grow up, and shared our lives. Many had been our business partners for years. Everyone in this room deserved the truth. My husband has spent the last year having an affair. Loud gasps echoed through the room. Not because they didn't already suspect it, but because hearing it said out loud made it real. People stared at Sabrina, some at Michael, while others looked away entirely. No one wanted to witness this kind of public collapse. But the collapse had already happened months ago. Tonight was just the grand unveiling. Michael took another step toward me. "Stop." The word was much sharper than he meant it to be. I noticed, and so did everyone else. For decades, Michael had carefully built his image as a calm, polished executive. But that mask was cracking, and cracks always spread. I calmly kept speaking. "I spent 35 years building our family," I said, my voice steady. "And 35 years building our company." I saw several former employees nodding in agreement. They remembered. They remembered the early struggles, the endless sacrifices, the brutal hours. Michael opened his mouth to cut in, but I kept going. "I trusted this man with my life." Silence. "I trusted him with my entire future." Silence. "I trusted him with absolutely everything." For the very first time, I saw real, heavy discomfort ripple through the room. It wasn't that they doubted me. Most just saw their own lives in my story. Betrayal is tragically universal. Once more, I reached into my purse. That single movement drew every eye. Michael's gaze hardened. "What are you doing?" he hissed. I ignored him and pulled out a second folder, thicker, heavier, and far more dangerous. Rebecca had put this together just for tonight. Suddenly, Michael actually looked nervous, genuinely nervous. All his smug confidence vanished. "What is that?" he muttered. I looked him dead in the eye. Documentation. His face fell instantly. Fear, real, raw fear, washed over him. The kind when you realize things are infinitely worse than you ever imagined. Others in the crowd picked up on it too. I saw it on their faces. They knew something massive was coming, something far bigger than just an affair. I glanced toward the ballroom entrance. Right on cue, Rebecca Lawson walked in. Her timing couldn't have been better. Whispers broke out instantly. Some looked confused. Others looked absolutely transfixed. Michael paled. He recognized her, and he knew exactly why she had come. Rebecca walked toward the stage, calm, professional, and completely unshaken. She took her place beside me at the podium. Michael glanced between us, scanned the crowd, then looked back at me. Finally, I saw pure panic. "Kristen, what are you doing?" His voice was barely a whisper. I finally answered, "What I should have done months ago." Rebecca opened the folder. Inside were summaries built from the evidence Nathan had gathered. No wild accusations, no speculation, just hard, documented, and fully verified facts. The entire room held its collective breath. Rebecca's voice was steady. During a review of assets associated with marital protection, several unusual patterns were identified. Michael snapped, "This is ridiculous." Rebecca didn't even pause. She just kept reading. Significant financial transfers occurred during the exact period of the relationship with Miss Hayes. Sabrina froze, completely rigid. Several executives traded uneasy glances. George Whitman crossed his arms, staring Michael down. The energy in the room was shifting fast. This was no longer just a messy affair. It had become about something else: trust, judgment, and his ability to lead. Rebecca continued, "These findings will be handled through proper legal channels." Every single word was deliberate, careful, and measured. Still, the point hit home. There were major, dark questions that desperately needed answers. Questions Michael couldn't run from forever. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Investors whispered, while others frantically checked their phones. Some executives looked deeply alarmed. Near the front, one businessman shook his head in disgust and walked toward the exit. Then another followed, and another. I watched Michael track them. He realized it right then. This wasn't just about me or our marriage anymore. His reputation was instantly crumbling. Years of building trust, credibility, and powerful influence, all of it suddenly under threat. The consequences were crashing down. Sabrina edged forward. I think we should go." Her voice was tiny, fragile. Nothing like the arrogant woman who swaggered in earlier. Michael looked at her, the crowd, and finally me. For one split second, I actually thought he might apologize, confess, maybe even tell the truth. Instead, he did what he always does. Trying to claw back control, he muttered, "You're making a mistake." It sounded desperate. I stared back, completely calm. "No, Michael." A heavy silence fell over us. "My mistake," I whispered, "was trusting you." The words hit harder than I anticipated. Even Michael looked stunned because he knew they were true. The room stayed silent. No one stood up for him. No one challenged me. Nobody argued. That silence said everything. They believed what they were seeing, right before their eyes. They saw the truth now. The sordid affair, the public humiliation, the endless lies, all of it laid bare. Then I turned to Sabrina. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. She refused to look at me, which told me everything. Innocent people don't avoid eye contact. When she finally shifted her gaze, a sudden realization hit me. She wasn't terrified out of love for Michael. She was terrified because something else was going on. Something massive she desperately wanted to keep hidden. That thought stayed with me. The deeper Nathan dug into his investigation, the shadier Sabrina's actual role in all of this became. Suddenly, I had to wonder if Michael was the only one being played here. As guests began drifting out of the ballroom, one thing was certain. This night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The divorce papers were served, and his public downfall had officially begun. But the worst truth was still lurking deep beneath the surface. Soon enough, everyone, even Michael, would find out that Sabrina Hayes had her own dark secrets. The morning after the party, Charleston felt hauntingly still. Maybe the city hadn't changed at all. Maybe it was just me. For months, I lived in a haze of doubt, fear, and endless questions. Now, I finally had answers. My marriage was dead. The affair was out in the open. The entire illusion had collapsed. Yet, even with all of this behind me, one massive mystery remained. Sabrina Hayes. The more I dug into her past, the less she made sense. But Nathan assured me we were finally close to figuring out why. 3 days later, I met Nathan and Rebecca at her office. The vibe was completely different this time. Heavy, quiet, and hyper-focused. Nathan had folders scattered all over the conference table. The second I walked in, he stood up. "I think we found it." My heart skipped. Found what? The real reason Sabrina targeted Michael. I sank slowly into my chair. For months, I thought the answer was simple. An affair, a midlife crisis, the cliché story everyone tells when an older man dumps a long marriage for a younger girl. Apparently, the truth was way more tangled. Nathan opened a folder, showing me copies of business records, public filings, and call logs. Nothing dramatic at first, just paperwork. But files tell stories, especially when you actually know how to read them. Nathan pointed at the highlighted sections. Look at the timeline. I studied the pages. Sabrina had joined Ferguson Development Group about 14 months back. At first, her job seemed totally normal. Then things changed in a flash. Within months, she got keys to secrets normal employees never see. Financial projections, strategic plans, future buyouts, and confidential vendor files. The pattern was bizarre, totally bizarre. Rebecca leaned forward, asking how unusual. Nathan didn't hesitate. Very. I looked between them. What are you saying? Nathan tapped another paper. I'm saying Sabrina got access that normally takes years to earn. A cold shiver ran through me, because I already knew exactly why she had. Michael, his affair, his obsession, his total lack of judgment. But Nathan wasn't done yet. There's more, he said. And those words gripped me instantly. Nathan slid another folder over. This one was full of public business records, corporate registrations, industry databases, and partnership details. The deeper I dug, the stranger things got. A rival development company kept popping up all over these records. At first, I didn't get why it mattered. Then Nathan explained that one of Ferguson's main rivals had been chasing the exact same contracts. I nodded. That was just business. Competition is everywhere. What does that have to do with Sabrina? Nathan looked right at me. She has connections. The room suddenly felt freezing. What kind of connections? Personal and professional. I just stared at him. For a few seconds, I was speechless. Then I finally asked, "Are you saying this wasn't just an affair?" Nathan looked over at Rebecca. Neither of them answered right away. That silence told me everything. Finally, Nathan spoke. "I think Sabrina wanted way more than just Michael." My stomach knotted. For months, I saw Sabrina as the homewrecker who stole my husband. Now, a dark new possibility was creeping in. What if Michael wasn't her only target? What if she was after Ferguson Development itself? The thought felt almost impossible to believe, yet the evidence kept growing. Over the next few weeks, more information surfaced. Industry insiders started whispering. Former staff shared their stories. Patterns emerged. People recalled Sabrina acting way too interested in private company files. Others remembered her aggressively pushing for insider information. Back then, everyone just thought she was ambitious. Now, those moves looked incredibly suspicious. One afternoon, George Whitman called me, his voice sounding grim. "We need to talk." We met at his office that afternoon. George locked the door before turning to me. I should have said something sooner. "What do you mean?" He sighed heavily. "There were rumors." My heart sank. "What kind of rumors?" George rubbed his forehead. "People thought Sabrina was gathering intel." I stared at him. "Intel for who?" That's the real question. The answer came much sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, Nathan found papers tying Sabrina to a consulting deal with people linked to Ferguson's biggest rival. It wasn't a direct link, but it was real, and enough to raise red flags. When Nathan laid it out, even Rebecca looked shocked. "Do you think Michael knew?" I asked. Nathan shook his head instantly. "No." There wasn't a single shred of hesitation, and suddenly, it all clicked. Every reckless choice, every unearned promotion, every blind exception, every chance Michael handed her on a silver platter. He thought he was the one in control. In reality, he was probably just being played. The irony was absolutely staggering. Michael had wrecked our 35-year marriage because he believed he'd found someone who worshipped him, who actually understood him, and someone who made him feel special. Instead, he handed massive power to a woman whose real motives looked darker by the day. A few days later, the bomb dropped. A trade magazine ran an exposé on leaked data inside local real estate firms. No names were dropped, no direct accusations, but insiders read between the lines instantly. The phones started ringing, and questions followed. Investors panicked. Business partners grew wary. The heat turned up overnight, and for the first time, Michael started feeling the burn of his own actions. George later told me that board meetings got incredibly tense. Other executives began openly questioning Michael's past decisions. People demanded answers. Trust was vanishing in seconds. Meanwhile, Sabrina was pulling a vanishing act. She stopped showing up to public events, ducked company parties, and ghosted calls from her own colleagues. Her dodging only made things look guiltier. That night, my son Ethan came over. He looked exhausted, older. This whole nightmare was killing him. We sat at my kitchen table in total silence. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and whispered, "Dad is a total wreck." I nodded. Part of me felt for him. The other part remembered every single lie, every betrayal, every public humiliation. "What happened?" I asked softly. Ethan stared at his hands. "I think he really thought she loved him." The heartbreak in his voice cut me, because despite it all, Michael was still his dad. And watching your parent completely self-destruct is agonizing, no matter how much rage you hold. Ethan looked up. "Did you know? Was she just using him?" I weighed the thought, then slowly shook my head. No, because the truth was far messier. I knew Sabrina wanted more than romance, but even I hadn't realized how far she would go. Neither did Michael. And now he was paying for it. A few days later, Nathan called with an update. His voice carried this heavy finality. "I think we are done. Done. We know enough." Enough? A tiny word, yet it ended months of painful doubt, constant digging, and dark secrets. The puzzle was finally complete. Sabrina Hayes entered my husband's life as an employee, only to become his mistress. She bought her way into his trust and built real influence. But when things got hot, she vanished, leaving him to face the wreckage alone. The ultimate irony was not that my husband betrayed me. It was that he destroyed everything for someone who was never loyal to him. The man who broke my heart had been broken himself. It felt sadder than satisfying because 35 years ago, I had fallen in love with a genuinely good man. Now I had to watch the hollow shell of who he had become. The weeks after that birthday party were the most emotionally draining days of my life. It was not because of Michael or Sabrina, and not even because of the lawyers, the money, or the public humiliation. The hardest part was watching my kids face the truth. Painful truth always demands a price from everyone it touches. Now it was my son Ethan's turn to pay that price. For months, he had defended his father, not out of cruelty, not because he did not love me, but because he could not believe his hero was capable of this betrayal. I understood that, even when it cut deep. About a month after the party, Ethan called unexpectedly on a Saturday morning. His voice sounded soft, almost fragile. He asked if he could come over, and an hour later he was sitting at my kitchen table, the very table where he ate breakfast as a kid, where we celebrated every birthday and holiday, the exact spot where he had once told me I was overreacting. Now, he could barely look at me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Ethan whispered that he owed me an apology. The words caught in my throat because I had desperately needed to hear them. I had not expected it, only hoped. Ethan just stared down at his hands. "I should have believed you," he said. I stayed quiet, letting him go on. He admitted he did not want to see it, desperately hoping his father was not that person. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered that he hoped it would just go away. My heart broke, recognizing that exact feeling. I had spent months doing the same thing, pretending, hoping, denying reality. Ethan softly whispered that he had been so wrong. Silence filled the kitchen again. I stood up, walked over, and wrapped my arms around my son. The second I held him, he broke down completely. For several minutes, he wept like a little boy. Not because he was weak, but because grief does not care how old you are. My son was grieving, not the loss of a parent, but the loss of an illusion, the father he worshipped. Finally, he pulled back and wiped his eyes. He apologized again, and I gently squeezed his shoulder, telling him I knew. For the first time in months, something between us started to heal. My daughter Lauren arrived later that evening. Seeing Ethan sitting in my living room, she immediately understood everything that had transpired. Without a word, she hugged him tight, then held me. The three of us sat together for hours, talking, remembering, and processing all of it. Eventually, Lauren started crying. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears, the kind that fall when you have carried a heavy burden for too long. She whispered she should have done more. I reached for her hand and told her no, looking directly into her eyes. She was caught in an impossible situation. She admitted she knew something was wrong and should have told me sooner, but I simply shook my head. She was only trying to protect everyone, though deep down she knew that meant protecting no one. But I had no interest in pointing fingers. Not anymore. We had already suffered enough pain, division, and heavy regret. All that mattered now was healing, which demands real compassion, even when loved ones fail us. Then, a few days later, the unexpected happened. Michael called. Not to fight, not to discuss the divorce or the finances. He just wanted to know if we could meet up. I nearly said no. Part of me wanted to shut him out forever. But I knew this final conversation was inevitable. So, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe by the water. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked ancient, not physically, but emotionally. His trademark confidence was completely gone. The polished corporate executive had vanished, leaving only a tired, exhausted shell. He was a defeated man. For a long while, neither of us said a word, until Michael finally spoke. He whispered that he never thought it would end like this. I just stared, his words feeling completely absurd. What did he expect? That I would just accept his affair? That I would bless his future with Sabrina and quietly disappear? I did not ask, knowing people like him rarely think of consequences. They only imagine outcomes. Then Michael sighed, admitting he made mistakes. Mistakes. The word immediately irritated me. An affair is not a mistake. Lying for months is not a mistake. Humiliation is not a mistake. It is a choice, a calculated series of choices. Yet I stayed silent. I hurt you, he said, and for once, his voice held real emotion, no performance, no manipulation, just pure pain. Oddly, that made it harder. It would have been so much easier to hate him if he had shown absolutely no remorse. Instead, I sat looking at a man who finally realized everything he had destroyed. Staring at the table, Michael softly asked if our kids hated him. That question revealed more than anything, he said. For months, he had focused only on himself, but now he finally saw my broken world. They are disappointed. My answer struck him hard. He nodded slowly, staring blankly out the window. I deserve that. For several minutes, we sat in silence until Michael spoke again. I never meant for things to go this far. There it was, the exact words everyone uses after disaster strikes. I never meant for things to go this far. As if consequences just appear. As if betrayal is accidental. As if ruin happens on its own. I looked right at him. You brought her to my birthday party. My words landed heavily. Michael closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment he looked genuinely ashamed. I know. No, Michael. My voice stayed calm. You don't. He looked up and I continued. You don't know what that felt like. The cafe fell completely silent. You don't know what it feels like to spend 35 years building a life with someone, only to be treated like you are disposable. His eyes filled with emotion, but I wasn't finished. You don't know what it feels like to sit in a crowd and watch your husband introduce another woman as his future. Michael hung his head because he had absolutely no defense, no explanation, and no excuse left. For the first time, he stopped trying to find one. When we finally stood up to leave, neither of us felt victorious. There are no winners in wreckage like this, only survivors. Walking back to my car, I realized something deeply important. Months ago, I desperately wanted him to understand my pain. Now that he did, nothing changed, because understanding damage does not undo it. Regret cannot erase betrayal, and apologies do not rebuild trust. Still, watching Michael finally face the truth mattered, not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but because accountability is the first step toward redemption. Whether he gets there remains to be seen, but at last he stopped lying, especially to himself. Our divorce officially began 3 weeks after my talk with Michael. By then, the shock of my birthday party had spread through Charleston's business circles. People gossiped. Of course they did. Some were sympathetic, while others were incredibly cruel. Most rumors were wildly inaccurate. That is the nature of public scandals. Everyone thinks they know our story, but almost no one actually does. For once, I stopped worrying about what others believed. That freedom shocked me. For decades, I had burned so much energy trying to maintain harmony, protecting reputations, and keeping everyone comfortable. Now, I had reached a point where my peace mattered far more than appearances. And that realization changed everything. The legal battle crawled along. As Rebecca warned me, divorces with huge assets are rarely simple, especially with businesses on the line and emotions running high. And in our case, we had plenty of both. The following months became a blur of meetings, documents, financial reviews, and negotiations. Sometimes it felt completely overwhelming, but I was no longer alone. Rebecca was relentless on my behalf. Nathan helped out wherever he could. And after so long, my kids, Ethan and Lauren, stood firmly beside me. Their support meant the world. One afternoon, deep into the proceedings, Rebecca called me with an update. "Are you sitting down?" I laughed. Never a comforting way to start a call. "What is happening?" "We have reached an agreement on several major assets." My heart raced. The negotiations had been brutal, not because Michael fought endlessly, but because untangling decades of shared wealth takes time. Rebecca walked me through the details. I would keep full ownership of several key properties. We would split certain investments, and the settlement would protect my other assets. I sat in silence, not calculating figures, but remembering the terrified woman I used to be, who feared losing everything. She felt so far away now. This was not about taking anything from Michael. I was simply reclaiming what I had helped build. Nothing more, nothing less. Later that night, I walked through the house I had called home for over 20 years. Every corner held a memory. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, family dinners, arguments, laughter, and a whole lifetime. Leaving made me sad, But strangely, it did not break me. This house was just a chapter, not my entire story, and that distinction mattered. Weeks later, I bought a small place on the South Carolina coast. It was modest, especially compared to what I could actually afford now. My new home overlooked the ocean, not from some luxury cliffside estate, but just enough to hear the waves at night, smell the salt, and remind myself that life keeps moving. When I first visited, I stood alone on the back deck for 20 minutes, just listening, breathing, and taking it in. For the first time in years, the future felt like something I could shape, not just something happening to me, but a life I could create. 2 months later, Lauren helped me pack. Ethan rented a truck. We spent the whole weekend moving my things. At one point, he stopped while carrying a box inside. He looked around, then smiled. "This feels more like you." His comment surprised me. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "It feels peaceful." I looked around. The ocean, the sunlight, the quiet. Maybe he was right. My peace had become far more valuable than prestige, status, or keeping up appearances. Our old mansion represented success. My new house represented freedom. And there is a massive difference. Around then, Michael's life kept spiraling down. I did not celebrate. Despite what people assume, watching your ex-husband suffer is not satisfying. Even when they hurt me, especially when they once mattered, reality was still reality. The fallout from his affair, the business scandals, and the public shame kept dragging him down. Multiple major partnerships crumbled. Investors backed away. Key projects stalled out. Ferguson Development survived, but it was no longer the powerhouse we once built. His reckless choices finally caught up with him. As for Sabrina Hayes, she vanished. Within a few months, she was completely gone from Ferguson Development. Nobody knew where she went. Rumors flew everywhere. Some said she moved out of state. Others believed she went to a rival firm. A few swore she left the industry entirely. Honestly, I didn't care. For years, I believed Sabrina was the villain of my story. Eventually, I realized she wasn't. This story was never about her. It was about choices. Michael's choices. My choices. The hard paths we take when facing temptation, fear, pride, or pain. Pointing the finger at Sabrina would have been much easier, but easy escapes rarely bring true healing. One afternoon, while unpacking in my new place, I found an old photo taken nearly 30 years ago. There we were, Michael and I, standing by a half-built project. The company was young, cash was tight, the future completely blank. Yet we were both smiling, so genuinely happy. I stared at our younger selves for a long time. No anger, no sadness, just deep gratitude. Because despite the wreckage that followed, those early years were real. The love, the heavy sacrifices, it was all completely real. The dreams were real. A chapter does not deserve to be erased just because it ended in pain. I tucked the photo into a drawer instead of tossing it. Some memories are worth keeping, even when they sting. As autumn rolled in, I settled into a new rhythm. Beach walks at sunrise, quiet coffee on the deck, deep talks with Lauren, calling Ethan. It felt strange at first, then slowly grew natural, comfortable, and mine. One evening, I sat out there watching the sun sink below the water, the ocean glowing in deep shades of gold and orange. The view felt magical. For months, my only focus was just keeping my head above water. Now, I wasn't merely surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. It was slow and far from perfect, but it was genuine. Hearing the waves hit the shore, a quiet truth hit me. Losing my marriage didn't mean my life was over. It wasn't even the end of my story. It was just the closing of one chapter. For the first time in forever, I felt truly ready to write the next page. That first year after my divorce taught me a lesson I wish I had learned decades ago. Starting over is not the same as starting from absolutely nothing. For months, the future terrified me. I feared being alone. I feared losing my purpose. I wondered who I even was without the identity I had held for 35 years. For most of my life, I was defined as a wife, a partner, a background support system. Now I had to figure out who Kristen Ferguson was when she belonged only to herself. The answers did not hit me all at once. They came in tiny, quiet, ordinary moments, the kind we rarely think to talk about. One morning, while walking near my place, I spotted an older woman sitting by herself on a beach bench. She looked down, not sobbing, just completely exhausted and defeated. It was an expression I knew all too well from my own mirror. We ended up talking for almost an hour. Her name was Patricia. She had just gone through a brutal divorce after 28 years of marriage. When we parted, she was smiling, not because I fixed her life, but simply because someone finally understood her. Walking home, a heavy thought settled deep in my mind. How many other women carried that same weight? How many felt completely trapped because they didn't understand money? How many stayed in toxic marriages because they thought they had no escape? The question haunted me for weeks until I could no longer ignore it. One afternoon, I called Lauren. I think I want to do something. She laughed. That sounds dangerous. I smiled. Maybe. What kind of something? I hesitated. Then I pitched my idea. I wanted to build a financial guidance service for older women. Not stock advice or wealth management, but basic financial education. The simple guidance I wished I had before my own world imploded. Lauren loved it instantly. You absolutely have to do this, she urged. Her excitement caught me off guard. I had not realized how much confidence I had actually rebuilt. Just months ago, I couldn't imagine a life after divorce. Now, I was designing a future. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades of building Michael's empire, I was finally building my own dream. The project started small, very small. A basic website, minor workshops, local events, nothing fancy. Yet the flood of responses blew past every expectation. Women reached out almost immediately. Widows, divorcees, retirees, women who ran households for decades but never touched a financial decision. Women terrified of tomorrow who just wanted someone to explain things without judging them. Their stories broke my heart. Over and over, I heard the exact same fear. I don't even know where to start. I got it. After the affair, I felt that exact same crushing helplessness. Those workshops quickly turned into something bigger than finance. They became safe spaces, real communities where we could speak honestly about our lives. Every time I helped a woman find her strength, I rebuilt a piece of my own. Meanwhile, My bond with Lauren only grew stronger. In many ways, this tragedy brought us closer than we had ever been. One Saturday, she joined me for lunch right after a workshop. As we sat looking out over the water, she suddenly smiled. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "You seem different." I laughed. "Different how? Happier?" Her answer caught me completely off guard. Happiness was not something I had thought about lately. Survival, healing, growth, those words made sense. Real happiness felt a little too ambitious. Still, the more I thought about it, the more I realized Lauren was right. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally living honestly. There is real freedom in that, a freedom I had completely forgotten existed. My relationship with Ethan started improving too, though differently. He carried so much more guilt than Lauren. For the longest time, Ethan could not forgive himself for defending his father. No matter how often I told him I understood, he remained brutal on himself. One evening, he dropped by after work. We sat out on the deck watching the ocean, our conversation drifting from family to careers to life. Eventually, Ethan turned to me. "I am proud of you," he said. The words shocked me. "For what?" He laughed softly. "For rebuilding." I stared out at the dark horizon. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he added, "I do not think I realized how strong you were." His words touched me deeply, not because I craved praise, but because it meant real understanding, the kind that only comes when people finally stop viewing you through old assumptions. For so long, even my own children had seen me as just mom, the caretaker, the helper, the quiet, steady presence. But now, they were finally seeing me as a whole person, someone with dreams, strength, and real resilience. That shift meant everything to me. As months passed, life slowly found a rhythm. My divorce was finalized. The grueling legal battles finally ended. The public drama faded away. People moved on to news scandals, different gossip. I was deeply grateful. I had zero interest in being the center of attention anymore. Peace suited me so much better. But then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with an unexpected call. The caller ID read George Whitman. I picked up immediately. "George?" His voice sounded amused. "Have you heard from Michael lately?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I said. "What is going on?" George chuckled. "He has been asking questions about you." I frowned. "What kind of questions?" "He wants to know how you are doing," George said. I was stunned. For months, Michael and I only spoke when necessary. Nothing more, nothing less. George went on. "I think he finally realizes what he lost." I had no idea how to respond. Part of me felt a quiet sadness. Another part felt relief, because his regret had arrived too late, much too late. After hanging up, I sat out on my deck and watched a storm roll across the ocean. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as lightning flashed in the distance. The sky felt strangely symbolic. For years, I had lived inside the storm. Now, I was watching it from a place of safety. Listening to the crashing waves, I realized something else. My story was no longer defined by betrayal. It was no longer about Michael. It was no longer about Sabrina either. My story had become something far deeper. My story was about rebuilding, about finding myself again, and proving life does not end when someone breaks your heart. Sometimes that is exactly where it truly begins. Though I did not know it yet, one final conversation still awaited me. A conversation that would bring this long chapter of my life to its end. Nearly 18 months had passed since the night I handed Michael my divorce papers in front of that crowded ballroom. 18 months. Long enough for deep wounds to start healing. Long enough for the bitter anger to fade. Long enough for life to find its new rhythm. Yet some chapters never truly close until you have that final conversation. Mine finally came on a cold autumn morning. The day began just like any other. I woke before dawn, brewed some coffee, threw a sweater over my shoulders, and stepped out onto my deck overlooking the ocean. The cool air smelled of rain and salt as waves rolled gently to shore. I was standing there watching the sunrise when my phone rang. The incoming number looked strangely familiar. I stared at the screen, then answered. Hello? A pause, then a familiar voice I had not heard in months. Kristen, he said. Michael. I closed my eyes. Not out of anger, but because hearing him out of the blue felt like opening a heavy door to another lifetime. Hi, Michael. Another heavy silence. Then he finally spoke. Could we talk? He sounded completely different than he used to. No confidence, no authority, no assumption that I would just agree. Only uncertainty. For a split second, I considered telling him no. Not because of hatred, but because I doubted this conversation even mattered anymore. But then, something inside me softened. Maybe curiosity, maybe compassion, maybe closure. I can meet for coffee, I said. His deep relief was obvious. Thank you. 2 days later, we met at a quiet cafe on the coast, far from Charleston and our old life, somewhere neutral. I got there first. When Michael walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked noticeably older, his posture worn down. That razor-sharp confidence that once defined him was completely gone. His polished corporate armor was gone. The man walking up to my table just looked tired, lonely, and vulnerable. Neither of us spoke. Then he sat down. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded. The waitress brought our coffees, leaving us in a heavy silence. Finally, Michael looked up. I owe you an apology. Those words hung in the air. I stayed silent. Not to punish him, but to let him keep speaking. For years, Michael would cut off hard conversations before reaching the truth. This time, I was not saving him. He had to find the words himself. I spent a long time blaming everyone but myself, he whispered. At first, I blamed Sabrina. I was not surprised. That is the easy way out, he nodded. Then I blamed my job. Then stress. He let out a bitter, hollow laugh. And eventually, I ran out of people to blame. For once, I heard real self-awareness, not defensive excuses. Michael stared down at his cup. When everything fell apart, I kept asking myself how it all happened. I listened in silence. I told myself I was unhappy, but he shook his head. That wasn't true. A long silence fell between us. Then he looked up at me. I was selfish. Simple words, but they hit hard. True accountability rarely sounds dramatic. It just sounds honest. Michael went on. I spent years convincing myself I deserved more. Those words immediately reminded me of all his talk before the affair, about success, growth, and new opportunities. It's the language people use when they're slowly letting go of gratitude. I forgot everything you did for me. His voice cracked slightly. I forgot who helped build my life. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The pain on his face felt real. Not a performance, not a strategy, just real. Then Michael said something I never expected. I read some of the old company records, he said. My eyebrows rose. The ones you kept. I understood immediately. The documents, the loan agreements, the financial records, the evidence of all my early sacrifices. Michael shook his head slowly. I couldn't believe how much I'd forgotten. I stared out the window at the ocean, at the life I had rebuilt. Years ago, hearing those words might have changed everything. Years earlier, they might have saved our marriage. Now, they just felt sad. Some realizations simply come too late. Michael swallowed hard. You were always the strongest person in the room, he said. It surprised me because for most of my life, I never saw myself that way. I saw myself as supportive, loyal, and dependable, not strong. Yet surviving everything had revealed a strength I never knew I had. Michael looked away, then quietly asked, "Do you ever miss us?" The question hung in the air. I thought about it, then answered honestly. Sometimes. He nodded. I went on. I miss parts of us. That distinction mattered because I wasn't mourning the marriage that actually ended. I was mourning the marriage I believed we had. The early years, the partnership, the shared dreams and struggles, not the deception that came later. Michael seemed to understand. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked the question I knew was coming, the question that had likely driven him to meet me. Do you think there was ever a chance for us to find our way back? I studied his face. The man sitting across from me was no longer arrogant, no longer dismissive, no longer blinded by his own ego. He genuinely wanted to know. So I gave him the truth. No. The word landed gently, not cruelly, just honestly. Michael closed his eyes, disappointment washing over him. Yet, strangely, he didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate or plead. Maybe because deep down, he already knew. Trust takes years to build, seconds to shatter. And sometimes, a lifetime isn't enough to rebuild it. I understand, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, something unexpected happened. I felt peace, not triumph, not satisfaction, just peace. For once, there was nothing left unsaid, no anger, no confusion, no unfinished business, only acceptance. We finished our coffee, talked briefly about Ethan, Lauren, and our lives, then eventually stepped outside the cafe. A gentle ocean breeze drifted through the air. Michael looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, Kristen. This time, I truly believed him, not because he wanted something, but because he genuinely meant it. I smiled softly. I know. Then I gave him something I never thought I could. Forgiveness, not reconciliation, and certainly not another chance. Forgiveness, because holding on to bitterness would only tie me to the past, and I didn't live there anymore. Michael's eyes welled with emotion. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he nodded, turned, and walked away. I watched him disappear down the sidewalk. the man who had once been the absolute center of my world, the man who helped shape my life, the man who nearly destroyed it. Then I turned toward the ocean, the endless horizon stretching out before me, bright, open, and beautiful. Standing there, listening to the waves, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone hurt you again. It's about refusing to let that pain control your future. Michael would always be part of my story, but he was no longer the author. I was. And for the first time in years, the next chapter belonged entirely to me. One of the greatest lessons I've learned is this: your value doesn't disappear just because someone fails to see it. For years, I measured my worth by my marriage, my family, and the life I helped build. When Michael betrayed me, I briefly believed all my sacrifices had been meaningless. But time taught me otherwise. The love I gave was real. The loyalty I showed was real. The sacrifices I made were absolutely real. Someone else's poor choices don't erase the good things we've done. I also learned that keeping silent isn't a sign of weakness. People expected me to scream, fight, or seek revenge. Instead, I chose patience. I quietly gathered the facts and protected myself. I waited for the right moment to stand up for my own dignity. Sometimes, strength isn't found in the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes strength is just the quiet decision to stop accepting what you don't deserve. Most importantly, I learned that healing is possible at any age, even when people think life shrinks after 60. My own experience proved the opposite. The end of my marriage was painful, but it forced me to rediscover who I was beyond being someone's wife. It opened doors I never expected, helped me build deeper connections with my children, and gave me the courage to create a life that truly belongs to me. If you're going through betrayal, heartbreak, or disappointment right now, please remember this: someone else's rejection does not define your future. Someone else's betrayal doesn't define your worth, and it is never too late to begin again. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? What would you have done if you were standing in my shoes at that birthday party? I hope you will share your own struggles in the comments below. Your story might be the light someone else needs to survive their own dark night. If you want to walk with me through more stories of healing, second chances, and emotional justice, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Before we part, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I truly cherish reading your notes and connecting with you across the miles.